where are some places that early childhood educators could go to educating themselves on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and contemporary issues?
I think the important thing is use the internet to start off with. Google search is sometimes the best thing to do. There are a number of websites like Share Our Pride, which is through Reconciliation Australia, which gives you a really good timeline about when events actually occurred. But it's not just about learning about the history, but it's also learning, how does this history impact on Aboriginal people today? We already know what the gaps are, early childhood education, getting kids to school, getting kids to year 12, immunisation. It's about keeping kids out of prison. So we know what the gaps are. So it's about going into the internet again and actually typing in Aboriginal people and health, Aboriginal people and stolen generation, Aboriginal people and homelessness, Aboriginal people and getting to year 12, so that we can start to understand how that history still currently impacts on Aboriginal people today. Aboriginal history isn't as far back as where we think it.
Where do you learn from?
Well, I learn every day. I've got to, first thing I need to admit, being Aboriginal doesn't make me an Aboriginal expert on everything. The Aboriginal culture is so diverse and so unique. We're made up of, 300 different nations per se, with over 600 different language groups that are around. I learn every time I meet with another Aboriginal person. I hear their story. I hear their Dreamtime stories. If I go traveling, they share with me places that I can go and can't go to. I'm always on that learning curve, wanting to know more. And when I teach, I try not to say I am an expert on everything Aboriginal. I can provide a perspective. I can provide my own perspective. I can provide perspective based on the information that my family and my community have told me. But I can't always speak on behalf of all Aboriginal people, because all Aboriginal people are so unique and diverse. I'm so lucky that I've got to travel so much throughout the country, that I've been to so many different rural, remote, urban communities. And people are always willing to share their story. I've just got to take time to actually sit down and listen to the stories that they're trying to share, because then I walk out with something I didn't know before, and that's knowledge about them and their family and their community.
What would be 2 things that you think every educator should know about working with First Nation families?
I think the first one is that every Aboriginal family is on their own learning journey themselves. We live in Victoria, and Melbourne is one of the most transient Aboriginal populations anywhere in Australia, which means it's not local people. They're people from all over Australia. We also know that I've never been in a capital city that's got so many gathering places around it as well. We've got, Sunbury, Melton, Kirrip. We've got the Auntie Alma Thorpe Centre at Northcote, Thornbury. We've got Mullum Mullum at Croydon, at Ringwood. We've got the City of Casey Gathering Place at Doveton. We've got Jabana at Frankston, Willamaraine at Hastings, and Dermot Willem at Moorabbin, which means right around Melbourne there's all these gathering places. And gathering placings are often established for lost souls or people that want to connect to culture, that have never been able to connect with culture before. We have got a high rate of, school kids in, years 7 to 9, where probably about 50% don't know their language group. And if they don't know it by year 9, means they haven't known it when they're younger. They haven't known it as a kid. They haven't known it as an infant.
What would be the other thing that every educator should know about working with First Nation families that you think?
I do think the thing that I always try to stress to people is that when you enroll a child, you enroll their whole family. And you've got to have a really good understanding about what the contemporary issues actually are that affect that family. Because if you can understand those contemporary issues, that's going to explain to you why they may be making a decision, why they may not be making a decision, why they may disagree with you, why they might not be happy, why they might be a bit scared, or why they might be refusing to do something. It's so important to, understand that Aboriginal people work in the collective. It's always about me and my family first, then the individual. And that's hard for some educators because we're so individualistic in parts of our teaching. We want to hear, personal goal setting. We want to hear, what someone's aspirations and dreams are. But for a lot of Aboriginal kids, it's not about talking about myself. It's actually about talking a bit about what my family does and what my community does. And we just kind of need to learn a little bit to take it back a step and actually go, how can I actually have community conversations with the family that's going to encourage them to actively participate in this learning process with us? Where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start educating themselves around Aboriginal history and the contemporary issues?
I could go on and on and on all day about all of this and where to find resources. Depends on where you're actually placed, AJ. There are always community organisations that you can reach out to listen to their stories. If it's a recognised Aboriginal area, then my go-to would be the traditional owner group of that area. We know that sometimes that's not always the place. So maybe reaching out to a local Aboriginal education group that might be in the area is always a good space to look. In Victoria, we have VAI, we have VACA, we have the Koori Heritage Trust in Melbourne. The Bunjalaka Centre in the Melbourne Museum is absolutely amazing. So just reaching out to see who is in community and if they have enough knowledge or the ability to share with people. So yeah, lots of websites. Just make sure they're genuine and authentic websites.
Being Aboriginal doesn't mean you know everything about Aboriginal issues and right across the whole country. Where do you learn from?
Elders. I learn from my elders. Like, I'm a middle-aged woman and I still get pulled up by my elders if I'm not doing the right thing, which I love. How else am I going to learn? Yeah. And then I then share that knowledge. They are the knowledge keepers and they will let you know when you are ready for that knowledge. So they're not going to tell me if they don't think I'm ready. So
what would be 2 things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
Yeah, relationship-based people. Build those relationships. It doesn't matter how much cultural knowledge that family has or what they know of their background, but make an effort to build that relationship with them. And I guess the other thing for services is the visibility. Making sure that your service has a large Aboriginal visibility. It could be the flags out the front, posters on the walls, puzzles within the service, just that highlighting of your wanting to embed Aboriginal perspectives into the services.
So, Bindi, where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start learning about the true history and contemporary issues?
I think there are definitely a lot of organisations within the Victorian Aboriginal community. Early childhood educators, could reach out to some of our elders who are doing consultancy work and, maybe have them come in and have a chat to them and their team. There's definitely TV programs out there. There's also a lot of our mob on social media with, a lot of Aboriginal businesses. A lot of them are doing work within the childhood the early childhood education space. So, yeah, I think that they're a good start at least. You know, we have our own newspaper, we have NITV, our own network. There's definitely a lot of places that they can go to online as well if they can't get out there.
Being Aboriginal, we don't know everything about Aboriginal issues, and I'd be surprised if you do as well.
I would never claim that, no, not at all.
Where do you learn about culture?
I'm very lucky. My mum, she's since entered the dream time. She was a great teacher and just a great storyteller. And, you know, even when we didn't want to listen, she was talking and telling us about our history, our family. So I've got a lot of knowledge, but since her passing, if there's something I need to know, I go home to country and talk to some of the elders up there, a lot of my uncles, and, you know, they'll take me out on country and start teaching me the things that I don't know, but I want to know. But, you know, just even every day in our community, we're always learning from each other. So, yeah, definitely our elders.
Do you think it's hard for Aboriginal young people to know all about their Aboriginality?
Definitely. Sometimes I think with the social media, it's disconnected the community a little bit. You know, when I was growing up, just going into Fitzroy, going into some of the orgs in there was always elders around and other community members. It's not the same as it used to be. And with COVID, it's made it even more difficult. You know, you just can't go in there, sit down, have a yarn and a cuppa. Yeah, definitely difficult for them.
Yeah. What are two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
Definitely a lot of our cultural practices, you know, or familiarise themselves with that. Good start's always some cultural training. And just the way that, you know, we're not just, when you're dealing with just the mother or the child or the father or the child, you're not just dealing with them. There's usually a whole community behind them. And it's not uncommon for other families to want to be part of what's going on with the child whilst they're at childcare.
Yeah. Do you think that early childhood educators are getting it right so far?
I think a lot of them are really making a lot of progress, and maybe it's because, you know, we've got a lot of upcoming generation and they're on social media and they're socially conscious, so they're definitely heading in the right direction by wanting to, you know, incorporate our culture into their learnings.
What would be one of the issues that early childhood educators might have in trying to embed cultural perspectives into the curriculum?
Some of the cultural issues are going to be, where do you draw that line and not crossing over from what's appropriate to inappropriate? You know, not stepping that boundary. Like, so there's things that they're going to want to teach them and think that it's okay, but it'd be like, hey, that's our responsibility. So just knowing those cultural laws as well, you know, which can be difficult. I mean, I even know some of our mob who are married to non-Aboriginal people, and they go on to have Aboriginal children, and there's still, even for them as a parent, there's cultural law boundaries that they just can't cross. At the end of the day, it's our responsibility. So therefore, it's also our responsibility to educate the educators.
Where would be some places that you would recommend early childhood educators go to start educating themselves around the history and the contemporary issues?
Yeah, look, I would suggest visiting their local Aboriginal gathering places or co-ops. I understand that AGECS is Victoria-wide, but just trying to start thinking about some local co-ops here. Like there's the Frankston Gathering Place, there's the in Frankston, there's the Bunurong Health Service in Dandenong, there's Preston, you know, Vars. There's so many places that you could actually start reaching out. And just by going there, you're going to start learning some of the history and getting a feel of the culture, and just start educating themselves in different things. Like one of my favourites is actually the Aboriginal Heritage Expedition, or Bunjalaka, at Melbourne Museum. You could watch some culturally specific movies, like The Rabbit Proof Fence. There's a lot more. Yeah.
I have a question. When you're at school, how much Aboriginal history was taught to you?
How much history was taught to me at school? Right. So I grew up, funny enough, in a small country town in New South Wales. Don't need to go specifically. In primary school, they were quite good. Like I grew up on country, Wiradjuri land. They were quite good in primary school by actually bringing in different aspects. We had a whole subject once a week on Aboriginality, but I don't remember learning too much about the history. By the time we went to high school, the idea was completely thrown out the window. I don't remember learning basically anything. Even in small country towns. Like in history, there was ancient history. There was the First World War. I remember learning stuff about American history. American history and the what do you call that war they had? The Independence War, or whatever it is. Yeah. So I remember learning about all that, but very little on our own culture here in Australia.
Yeah. So where do you learn culture from? Where did you learn culture from?
So where did I personally learn culture from? Yeah. So my culture started in my roots. I was brought up on country. I'm one of the very lucky few to have actually been brought up on my country. So I learned loads from my family. Specifically, I learned a lot from you, AJ, being my brother and being as brilliant you are. I can butter you up all day.
I don't know, Tristan is my brother.
Yeah, I know brothers beat on each other a lot, but I've got nothing but praise for AJ. He's taught me tremendous amount. And I've been lucky enough to come to many of your cultural awareness trainings and also participate in training myself. So a lot of my understanding, of course, being from growing up with it, has come from attending, even as an Aboriginal person, attending loads of cultural awareness training, but I've also had the privilege of working in various Aboriginal positions. I've gone out and I've sought my own career in Aboriginal organisations and affairs, and I've listened to countless voices and stories of many Aboriginal aunties and uncles and community members. And just talking about, that's all happened and that's all part of my life. But just speaking about my current situation now at my university, I'm happy to tell you that there's been multiple Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander specific subjects that I've, learned loads. So, yeah.
What would be two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind when working with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families is you should really appreciate and understand that we're all different. You don't start working with an Aboriginal family with preconceived judgments and assume that we're all the same, that they're all the same. I'm very different from other Aboriginal people. You'll see that there's no one size shoes fit all. The stolen generation is very real and prevalent. Yeah. So some families may have only just found out about their Aboriginality and may know very little. So keep an open mind and remember to demonstrate cultural humility at all times. Another thing I'd consider when working with Aboriginal families is be careful of the use of, how do we say, Aboriginal definitions and terminology. A lot of the Aboriginal people take offence to the term Indigenous. I know a lot of people don't even know this, but The term Indigenous, I've found over my time, can be quite offensive to a lot of Aboriginal people, because the term Indigenous is actually used to define both Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people together. You know, for example, what I mean by that is I'm a Wiradjuri Wotjobaluk man. You know, I'm an Aboriginal man from New South Wales and the top of Victoria. I'm not Torres Strait Islander. You know, so you can categorize us together, yes, but you need to be careful about that, you know, or using, or using expressions or words such as Koori to talk about every Aboriginal person you meet, as this term is also only used for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders from New South Wales and Victoria. Now, always be curious and ask people what they'd like to be called or how they'd like to be addressed. You know, this also goes for aunties and uncles. Just because the person you meet is an elder doesn't automatically mean that their title is uncle or auntie. You might even meet somebody who's a lot younger who carries that title. So be curious, be open-minded, and be ready to learn.
Where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start learning for themselves about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and the contemporary issues?
Yeah, AJ, I know many educators have tapped into in their workplaces the Narragansett platform and have specifically navigated their way through to the early childhood section of that website. And that's a brilliant avenue with so many great resources. I know in my working with services, when I've been really encouraged them to broaden their scope of, you know, continuously look for great reputable sources, and the Australian Institute of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies, the AGECS website, I think has been a really great website. I really like the defining moments section on that website. I think that there is some really great information on there that gives people some great opportunities to hear stories and see aspects of where Aboriginal people have been so heroic and really been championing in their life. And so I think that's been a really good website to tap into. I also like the NAIDOC Week website, and I found I in my own journey have found that really interesting. I know when you look on that website and look at the past themes, they tend to give you a bit of an indication of what are important issues for Aboriginal people, such as Hill Country, 2017, Our Languages Matter. So I think that's a great avenue to explore as well. And I particularly also like that they include the poster artist. So that way services and educators can actually do some inquiry with the children and look at, you know, who did the artwork for that year and what other creations have they got. Let's celebrate this artist. So I think that's a really good website to really celebrate.
No, cool. Where do you go to start learning about things?
When in all honesty, AGECS has been my go-to. That's how I became affiliated with AGECS, is because I first came to that first webinar in the series, the RAP series. And in all honesty, not just because you're interviewing me, I have found the content the best learning tool for me, apart from the content that's the conversation. The key organisations that you have connected with through those has given me a broader understanding, and since then I always connect with those people after they've been present. So Sue-Ann Hunter and Nicole Finlay, so I connect with them and then follow their journeys. So I've actually found that really, really helpful, so that it's not just a one-off event for me, and I'm really passionate about not just doing a one-off thing. If you've brought someone onto a webinar, I then follow and look and have a look at and read their books, and I've got a massive pile of books, and I'm so excited because this one came in the mail yesterday, and I only ordered it the night before. So I'm forever reading is something that I was never big on in school, believe it or not. I absolutely never read. In fact, my English teacher, that was one of his issues in year 10. Nicole, you haven't read the book again. Stand up if you haven't read the book. Nicole, stand up, please. And I have actually intentionally done a 360 in the last, I would say, 5 years, and I've been reading more and more and more, and then go figure I write a book. But which is a bit ironic now I've told you that story. But I read. I actually just continuously find sources of information. The possum skin pedagogy was something that I became familiar with years ago. And then I just had I was so grateful to go to the FKA a few weeks ago, and we really delved deeper in that with Sue Atkinson. And so I think that's been nice to revisit. I always try and gain a resource and then revisit it as I know more, so that I can then realign what my new understandings are with the text or the content that I had read previously. So I find that has been a really good go-to for me. I think, really AGECS and reading. Another Day in the Colony is something that I am yet to read, so that's on my list of readings to do.
Sounds like you're going to open an Aboriginal literacy bookshop.
I absolutely could. You should see the pile I've got over there.
Yeah.
I got to read it yet. I look at it and go, remember what you promised yourself?
Yeah, but great PD for educators, isn't it? Read a book.
It absolutely is. And usually when you're buying a book, those algorithms are very clever, because then they'll go, and purchasers have often bought these. And so then I scroll down and go, oh, I'll buy that too. And I'll buy that too. And so before you know it, I've gone on to buy one book and I end up buying 3 books, which I'm okay with. I think it's great. What else would I be utilising? I would always make sure that I tap into blogs and read newsletters. So I subscribe a lot, because an email, and then I have a folder in my inbox, which is literally my reading. And so Reconciliation Victoria, when they would send their newsletter or their update, I drag that in so that I can go back and read those articles, or I print those articles. And when I go to conferences, I always take an article with me to talk about something that I've learnt. So I'll do an acknowledgement of country, and then somehow I will find an aspect of what I've read and share that with the audience, so that I can at least give them an opportunity to hear it too.
What would be two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
Don't assume that, you taught me this, AJ, that, and I recently learnt this, that often you hear people using the word Koori and use it interchangeably, Indigenous Koori. And I heard you say on Seminar 9, I think it was, that not all Aboriginal people see themselves as Koori. So I actually thought that was really valuable, because in my work with education and care services, sometimes I see that in the writing. So I thought that's really good to know, and I think every educator should know that. The other thing too, I think, is don't be afraid to. It's more hurtful to not include Aboriginal ways of knowing in your curriculum than if you endeavour to include, but I always say, do your homework, do your groundwork. It's your responsibility as a professional to know what's high quality practice, just like when you're looking at culture, including a cultural perspective into your curriculum. Do your homework and ask and seek information to make sure that you A, have permission, and B, that you are being appropriate and respectful.
So, Sandra, where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start educating themselves on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives?
Cultural safety training. Again, I say the little red, yellow, black book. I did a TAFE course in 2015 called Aboriginal Cultural Education. So there are courses out there. Watch NITV to keep up to date with news and current affairs. I think that's really important. Subscribe to Reconciliation Australia and they will send you up-to-date newsletters. Go to websites such as VACA and SNAKE, indigenous.gov.au. There's also a website, Map of Indigenous Australia. So there's many things out there. Narragansett website. I think all of those, you'll learn lots.
Yeah. Where did you learn from?
All of those. And also webinars. I did a lot of webinars, a lot of reading, a lot of websites. As I said, I did an Aboriginal cultural education course in 2015. I talked to a lot of people. I talked to you, AJ. And yeah, you never stop learning.
What would be two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
Well, I think there's lots of things that we need to know, but I think the importance of family and connections with extended family, and maintaining the cultural identity of extended family, because I don't think everybody understands that. The second one would be protocols. Welcoming, how they like to be addressed, language, because all Aboriginal people are in different places and spaces. So I think being open and honest and knowing the protocols that are applicable to that family, I think is really important.
Where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start educating themselves about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and the contemporary issues?
I find that on your website is a really good one. And of course, the AGECS webinars are a really good one to find which organizations are out there. And then also finding out what is those backgrounds and getting some more resources. Finding out about how to do things within early childhood. I'm finding that the VA with the document called Walking Together has been the best collection of protocols, but also resources and places where to go and find more information. Because I started making Word documents with all those videos that you can use, and this is a great video, this is a great video, this is a great document. But the Walking Together document, for me, put it already all together and finding, and that's got links to videos that are really meaningful and good to use. Besides, NITF, the television channel, is fantastic to just start looking at some of the movies, the documentaries, and SBS, of course, too, has whole streaming blocks of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture knowledge to learn from. So I would definitely start on those free streaming services.
Yeah, what would be two things that you would want every educator to know about working with First Nations families?
Ooh, two things. When you work with, I think, always see yourself as a learner, but also the respect of knowing that not everyone knows what mob they're from and how much of Aboriginal culture they know themselves. And I've had experiences with that too, where I'm going, oh, it's so great you're here, and not knowing that that person has very little and has so much hurt and little knowledge of which mob they're from and from their culture. And to be really sensitive about that, I think, yeah, being sensitive about when you talk about with families about how much background knowledge they have, but also always be a learner because you never stop learning from people.
So, Alana, what are some places that early childhood educators go to start educating themselves on the history, but also the contemporary issues faced by Aboriginal people?
Yeah, well, I'll start with contemporary issues. I know people say, oh, social media, it's bad. I actually think social media is great. It's a bit like money. It's what you do with it, you know. And I follow some really amazing Aboriginal singers, you know, artists, leaders, politicians. You want to get contemporary issues, you just go on Instagram. You know, it'll be popping up all the time. There is information coming at you all the time. You couldn't help, if you were reading any of it, even just a little post, you couldn't help to not pick up some things. And but go local. You know, there's local groups, there's educators, VAI, Victorian Aboriginal Education Association, there's Narragansett, which is not local, that's more national. I keep saying come back local as much as you can. There's a place that I accessed when I was doing inclusion and support, the closest one I could access because we didn't have a co-op in the area, in the Bay Area where I was doing inclusion support. So I went to the Dandenong one, and they were fantastic. They're just so welcoming. You know, if you want to know, they want, if you're ready to listen, they want to tell you, and or direct you in the right direction, or link you up to a person or whatever. But yeah, start there if you're not really sure. Go to the AGECS website. We've got so much. AJ, you've done such an amazing. This is unprecedented. You know, just you've covered so many aspects. What one thing that you've kept reminding us is when we enroll a child, we enroll a family. When we enroll an Aboriginal child, we enroll a family. And of course, we're not just talking about having Aboriginal children in your centre. We're talking about creating culturally safe early childhood contexts right across the board so that Aboriginal families then feel welcome. It's about getting sorted before you have an Aboriginal family possibly knocking at your door, or they might never, because they might not feel welcome anyway, is what I understand. But go local as much. Go to events, you know, attend an event. It's amazing who you meet and what you pick up just by going to a concert, or maybe there's a ceremony, or they're happening all the time locally and maybe in the wider region. And then, of course, they're happening state and nationally. So there's all different levels you can access.
Question, what would be two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
I really love the saying, and I think it was one of the early ones. It's been said before, but the way it was said really stuck with me. Nothing about us without us. And that has been a big thing. There seems to have been a confusion. If people are starting a reconciliation action plan, a RAP, you know, they can kind of run off and do it themselves. Just, oh, we'll do it. And of course, it doesn't make any sense. It's reconciliation. Reconciliation is about mending. It's about listening. Yeah, so that would be a biggie. And, you know, This is a really tough question because I could have a list of another 10 things, but probably the other thing is local, it's getting much better, but when I first started exploring Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander perspectives over a decade ago, people would, I want to teach in an Aboriginal community. I'm going to go north. I'm going to go to Broome. I'm going to go to Fitzroy Crossing. I'm going to go to the Yap, and stay here where you are. Where do you live? Where do you work? Because it's here. That was a big lesson for me. And I can say, 30 years ago, that's what I wanted to do.
So where are some places that early childhood educators could go to start educating themselves about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and the contemporary issues?
Okay. Read and go to authentic websites. The Aboriginal Cooperatives, they've got their websites. But this crazy big book, the Macquarie Pen Anthology of Aboriginal Literature and Poetry, is something that will set you up. It starts in the early 1800s, late 1800s, with letters and stories written by Aboriginal people about the protesting of what was happening to them. And that's the true history. They kept writing to people to say, we are not getting what you told us we were getting. We are being treated badly. This has been going on for far too long.
Yep. What language area are you living in at the moment?
I'm living on Wadawurrung country, but it's also can be called Wadawurrung country or Wadawurrung country. And I made a huge mistake. AJ, it was terrible. I asked someone why there was different names, and he just said, because there are. And I said, well, you can't have different names. And he just looked at me and he said, we can. And I said, I apologise. And yeah, and I will say, and I've been told Wadawurrung, but then other people will say Wadawurrung or Wadawurrung.
How much history tracing or learning around the Wadawurrung people, and how did you do that?
I have. The Aboriginal Cooperative had a gorgeous book that they put out for non-Aboriginal people to read, and that gives you information about how the Wadawurrung people lived on country. There was just so much information about it. I've also gone to, and this is other sites as well, where you go to history sites or historical sites around Geelong. They'll have some history, but the history is presented very differently. So it's presented about how they removed people, or they kept moving people out, or they kept taking over their land. So pretty much they're sort of reinforcing what they were doing. It is written by colonisers as well.
Yep. What would be two things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
One, you need to show respect. You need to be very, very welcoming, and you need to ask them questions about themselves, and to let them, not let them, but then they will tell you who they are and their mob, but they will. This is what they want to tell you. I remember 1980. I had a kindergarten teacher say to me, she said, "Oh, I've got this Aboriginal assistant and she just keeps talking about herself." And I said, yeah, because she wasn't allowed to, and now she is, and listen, and maybe let her sit down, get her to sit down with the children. They can listen as well.
So Alex, what are some places that early childhood educators could go to start educating themselves on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history and the contemporary issues?
Well, for starters, they should go and watch all 12 reconciliation series seminars that AGECS delivered in the past 18 months. And if they haven't done that, I would implore them to pause right now, go and do that, and then come back. And then for other resources, I would say that looking further into the organisations that we actually spoke to during the reconciliation seminar series is really helpful. I learned so much just from the About Us pages of Snake, of Reconciliation Australia, of VACA, of VEA. Like, it's really interesting to see why those organizations were created in the first place, because it really does tell you a lot about what was happening at that time, and then what that organization is either morphed into or what they were always doing, because it hasn't changed that much in the time that they've been around. So I would say actually look at the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander organizations that exist in your community, but also, you know, nationally. And finally, and this is probably, I mean, preaching to the choir, but there are so many books out there. Like, there are so many books written by amazing Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors. I was just gifted a book called Another Day in the Colony by Chelsea Watego, which I haven't started reading yet, but it's there waiting. I got it last week. But you just get perspective and history from really talented writers. So you don't even realize how much you're learning, because it's just, I mean, it's hard to read, but it's also easy to read in the sense that it's so well written.
Do you find it confronting sometimes, what you're reading about history and contemporary issues?
I mean, absolutely. Especially, I think, when it sneaks up on you how recently some of it has been happening or currently happening. I think it's when you go, that's really horrible, but it happened in the past. And then, oh my goodness, wait, no, that's really horrible, it's happening right now. That you just take a moment, you're like, oh, how is it possible that we live in Australia in 2022 and some of these things are just still occurring? It's illogical. So you just go like, oh my gosh.
What would be 2 things that every educator should know about working with First Nations families?
So I think the first thing that every single person, you know, listening to this today needs to know is that they're quite probably teaching First Nations children, and they don't know that they're teaching First Nations children, because there are so many families that just do not feel comfortable putting that information on their enrolment sheets. And when you think about it, unless you've gone out of your way to prove to those families that you're a trustworthy and respectful and inclusive person, why would they share that information with you? Like, it really is on us to make sure that families feel comfortable sharing that information in the first place, because so many don't, for really good reasons. I think that's the second thing to keep in mind is you have no idea of the experiences of the families you're dealing with. So we always have empathy for our families, but I would say you got to turn it up a notch when you're dealing with First Nations families. And they might not need it. They might not need that extra empathy. They might be fine. But if they do need it, then they really need it. So just, turn it up a notch. And in saying that, make sure that when you are turning the empathy up, that you're also listening more. I mean, it's always important to listen, but I think there's hearing and there's listening, and it's really important to listen.